Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1921 Diary Series, and we are up to the 13th March 1921. Wow, that was exactly to the day 25 years before I was born. And beyond that useless little bit of trivia, I have another one. Since Ducky, Grand Duchess Victoria Fyodorovna, has been appearing in these and will indeed be appearing today in a fairly central part. It's interesting to realize that she and Dmitri had something in common. Aside from being members of the same family, they had both spent time at Sanatorium Schatzalp in the Swiss Alps, above the town of Davos. And Ducky was there in 1903 with her sister and brother-in-law, Alexandra, her sister Alexandra, and brother-in-law, what was his name? I can't remember. Seems like they were all called Ernst, but it was probably something else. I know Ernst was her husband. She was already divorced at that time. And Dmitri, of course, would be a patient there in 1939 to 1942 when he died there. And I wonder if he had any communication with Ducky about Schatzalp when he decided to go there himself. Anyway, as I said, a bit of trivia. So, our recap today, yesterday on the 12th of March, we had lunch with Ducky, a very uncomfortable lunch, very unpleasant for Dmitri, and a get-together with Audrey Parr, I think for tea, and then with Maria, and Dmitri, I should say a recap for both the 11th and 12th, because he did two very short diary entries, which we covered last time, and he had no memory either day of what he'd done for dinner, and he was kind of moping around, looking for a little bit of comfort from Sis. And yeah, we'll find out more about his state of mind at that time. We have a large cast in this particular diary entry of the 13th because Ducky is having a little soiree, I guess you could say. And the only person who's really important, I mean, they were all important as human beings, but who's important for our purposes, and not even really important, just interesting, was Ducky's youngest sister, Princess Beatrice Baby B. So she's there. And I am not going to talk at length about any of these people, so don't worry about that. You know, it was justified with most of the people that Dmitri met in Denmark and in Berlin, because they were people that told us something about him. And these people don't really tell us anything about him. They are part of Ducky's circle. And so, since this isn't Ducky's diary that we're doing, I'm not going to go into detail about them. Some of them are fairly obscure anyway. So let's dive in. It's the 13th of March, 1921, a Sunday in Paris, and Dmitri wrote this at his flat, 76 Rue Miro Menil. Here we go. I spent the morning writing and didn't go to church. I lunched at Maria's, and then she and I and Gulia took a walk in the Bois. I had tea at Maria's. Around 5 o'clock, I went to see Coco, but I couldn't find her at the Ritz. I dined that evening in Ducky's rooms at the Loti. There were four of us: Ducky, Baby B, who looked horrible, she was frightfully unwell, and old Nicolopoulou. Quite a few people turned up after dinner, and Ducky spoke to them very solemnly, acting as though they had all come on their own initiative, but then it turned out that she had invited them herself. Those present were Olga Orlova, both Sheviches, who acted like they were her suite, she playing the lady-in-waiting and he the court cavalier, accompanying me to the staircase. Both Etters, the former commander of the Kiev and then the Semyonov regiments, Olga Serebryakova, and Katya Gagarina, who's now called Ignatieva. From Ducky's, I went to the Ritz and saw Coco and went to her apartment there. I was in a terrible mood. I felt horribly depressed. I'll explain why later. Coco was frightfully sweet and touching. She talked me out of going to England and began trying to persuade me to go to the Riviera and said if I did, then she would go with me. I must admit that I was terribly tempted. I got home very late. Okay, so all that is interesting, isn't it? Let's start out with this little cluster of people before we go any further. So baby B, of course, Princess Beatrice of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. She was married to a Spanish prince who I didn't look up. Sorry about that. She was 7 years older than Dmitri, give or take a few months. And she was a bit of a bad girl, as I understand it. He'd talked to her quite a lot in an earlier diary entry when he was spending some time with the Queen of Spain, Ina, and the Queen of Spain was casting a wary eye at baby B as someone who was after her husband, or I don't remember it all, but Dimitri's opinion at that time seemed to place the blame on baby B and saying she's really stirring up trouble. Old Nicolopoulou, this was a fairly mysterious person, although he also appears in Dimitri's diaries elsewhere. He seems to have been called Jean, and Jean may have been, there was a George Nicolopoulou, there was a Dmitri Nicolopoulou, there was a George Dimitrios. I can't keep them all straight. They were involved with a shipping company, a Romanian shipping company, and based in Marseille and in Liverpool, and they were from Constantinople. They weren't from Greece. They were a Greek family living in Istanbul or Constantinople and having this shipping company, probably very wealthy people. If this is the Nicolopoulou I think it is, he was in his 60s at the time, and I've never been quite sure on what his connection was with the Romanovs. Anyway, next we have Princess Olga Konstantinovna Orlova. She was 49. She was married to the famous Vladi Orlov, who was the head of Nicholas's military chancellery, I believe, and who appears all the time in pre-revolutionary Romanov diaries and letters. The Sheviches are quite obscure. They were connected somehow to Ducky's mother-in-law, the late, only not pretty recently deceased Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna the Elder, and I think several of these people had connections, had been part of the mini court of Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna the Elder, who was called Michin in the family, so it's not surprising now that they are part of Kirill's court, such as it was. And then we have General Ivan Sevastyanovich Etter. He was in his 50s. He was the brother of a man whom Dmitri got to know fairly well in Persia. An Etter, I think his name was Alexander, who instead of going into the military had gone into the diplomatic corps and was the Russian minister in Tehran while Dmitri was there. And he was married to a Klein-Michel, a Maria Klein-Michel. The Etter that's there with Ducky was married to Maria Klein-Michel, who was also there with her. They were there as a couple. She was in her 40s, and she had been a lady-in-waiting to Empress Alexandra. Fyodorovna. Okay, then we have Olga Vladimirovna Serebryakova. She was in her 50s, and she either had or would marry the ex-husband of Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna, Peter Oldenburgsky, so the Duke of Oldenburg, who was involved, if I'm not mistaken, with, or was that the Duke of Lichtenberg? Anyway, one of them, I think Oldenburg was, no, maybe not. I shouldn't say that. Anyway, I was thinking of Aufbau. One of the two of them was involved with Aufbau, but I don't think it was Pyotr. Anyway, the last person, Tatiana Alexandrovna Gagarina Ignatieva, she was 6 years older than Dmitri. He knew all these people. None of them were strangers to him, but apparently he hadn't seen Tatiana since she'd married to this Ignatiev instead of, he knew her by her previous married name, Gagarina. Okay, so that's all of them. Yeah, okay, so the point of all this is, as Dmitri saw it, is that Ducky was trying to not just impress him, but specifically give him the idea that Kirill's role as emperor was a fait accompli, because look, I already have this court, and these people come to attend on me, even without having an invitation to a soiree. They just come because their empress is in Paris, and so they come to attend upon me. And Dmitri figured out that that was not true, that she had specifically invited them. And he, you can almost see him rolling his eyes at these two Sheviches, the wife playing the lady-in-waiting, and the husband acting like a kind of equerry, meeting him in the lobby of the hotel and accompanying him to the staircase to go and go up and be with his empress, in the presence of his empress. So all very grand and pretentious and absolutely designed to put Dmitri in his place. Okay, so he refers to this horrible depression. Well, that's been building up, and that is partly because of this whole thing with Ducky, but there's a larger dimension to it, and he tells us here that he's going to tell us all about that, although we pretty much know that it's all related to the repercussions from his visit to Berlin. Okay, poor fellow. He's been dragging around looking for Coco, and she's a busy woman, and he went there to see her before the soiree, but she wasn't there at the Ritz. And he goes there afterwards, and this time he finally finds her, and he really gets what he needs from her. And I'm not talking about, what, I'm talking about moral support. Okay, so interesting that he's not mentioning Googie. He hasn't, in these, he wouldn't necessarily in these short diary entries, but he's not saying, oh, I got a letter from Googie, or I sent a letter to Googie, or I've been, I got her photograph framed, or anything like that. Just no mention of her. And that was probably a foregone conclusion, that if he'd proposed to her in Denmark, all well and good, but once he was gone from Denmark, he wasn't really going to look back. Okay, so another really interesting thing is to find out that he'd been planning to pull up stakes and go back to England. He was depressed, and things were tense in Paris, and so he was just going to go back to England. And oddly enough, England was kind of his comfort zone. It was the first place he'd gone after after leaving Persia. Had gone there with the Marlings, who were like his surrogate family, and yeah, he had lots of friends there among the English nobility and wealthy people in general, and they invited him to house parties and so on and so forth. You get the picture. But Coco says, Oh, don't do that. Why don't you go off to the Riviera? That would do you a world of good. Obviously, she didn't literally say that. That's the novelist in me coming out. Okay, but he says that she tried to persuade him to give up this idea of going to England and go off to the sunny Riviera instead. And he's tempted by the idea. He's tempted by the idea. Oh, we know what a struggle he's had over the last few months to think about. I need to prepare for my future as emperor, and so certainly it would be difficult even to marry a nice, well brought up aristocratic girl like Marie Louise, let alone running off with someone like Coco Chanel. So this will kind of be their elopement, and yeah, we'll find out about why he's now willing to do that. Okay, so next time, Coco is now going to be in every diary entry, I think it's safe to say, but he also will be meeting with Audrey Parr, and he will have an interesting engagement that his sister and brother-in-law will also be going to, where he meets up with his stepsister, one of his stepsisters, and also a certain duchess, not a member of the family, and so that will be interesting. But Coco is the center of everything now. And yeah, so we're moving into a new era in Dmitri's life, and I hope you'll come back for that. I promise it will be very interesting. We have 2 more diary entries left, 14th and 15th. I may do them both together because they're both short, although not quite as short as the ones of the 11th and 12th. And then we'll be diving into one of the very long, extensive diary entries where Dmitri will talk about Coco and how he feels about her, and he'll be talking about the source of his depression and so on and so forth. And that diary entry, the next 2, he will write in Paris, but that diary entry that's coming up will be written in Monte Carlo. Surprise, surprise. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.